Okay, everybody, thank you for coming to the Xanadu review yet again. My name is Prester John Anders, but you can just call me PJ. Well, today with me, I have Mo Diggs, who writes the Cross Current Substack, writes the Cross Current blog on Substack. Mo, appreciate you coming on, buddy. Do you want to go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your writing and kind of the beat that you cover, so to speak?
Hey everybody, my name is Mo Diggs. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, PJ. And yeah, I write about tech, culture, legacy media, which I still maintain is important, by the way, even though it can be, overbearing or,
Mhm.
it can be mired, and it's, but then again, so can tech. So, yeah, and I write a Substack called Cross Current. It's a free Substack for now. And we also have a few projects coming up, but we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. So yeah, let's get started.
Yeah,
I hate
perfect.
bios. Can you tell that I hate bios? I don't know if you could
Yeah,
tell.
well, maybe you'll hate the next question then, since
Okay.
because I was reading a lot about so I had read most of your articles as they've been released, but I went through and binge read the vast majority of them again today while I was getting into it. And one of the things that you cover, broadly speaking, is American culture and different generations and how they've interacted with culture and history. And I guess my first question is, I mean, you don't have to say exactly how old you are if you're trying to preserve anonymity, but like, where do you fall in? Are you a millennial, Gen X, Zoomer? Where
I'm
are you?
Generation X. Honestly, it's funny you ask that because I feel like I bring that up all the time. I feel like I bring my age up all the time, but it just goes to show you can never say some things enough. So yeah, no, I'm 48, 49 next week,
Well,
and
early birthday.
Generation X. Thank you. Yeah. And I try to really put that as forefront. I mean, needless to say, Zoomers, Generation Z is topical, so I have to kind of talk about that, maybe a little self-indulgent to bend everything on the news to Generation X. But yeah, I hope I never gave off the impression that I was anything younger than I was. If I did, I'm sorry.
No. I thought you were, and again, I guess grade me D for active reading because I somehow missed that when I was rereading today. But no, I kind of clocked you at either Gen X or older millennial because I feel part of the reason I wanted to have you on is it seems like we like a lot of the same writers and cover a lot of the same topics. But I guess to jump into it a little bit, not exactly a bio, but kind of maybe a little bit about your political or cultural journey, because you're one of the people that I enjoy reading most on Substack because you're not somebody who can be easily put into one category or the other of, the culture war left or right.
Yeah. Well, I just kind of want to put a bow on the generation thing first. I'm as I'm the very last slot of Generation X. Apparently, the exennial category starts in 1977. You're born 1977 and you're an exennial. I, needless to say, consider myself an exennial. I mean, I do have overlap with millennials, very extremely elder millennials, obviously, but there is overlap. Like I was in my 20s during the hipster heyday of the early 2000s, so it's not that you're not insanely wrong to think that, I get it. And I do, a lot of my best friends are millennials. That's not that crazy. But getting to your question, because I do not want, I'm
Mhm.
not trying to deflect it.
No, no,
Look,
that's what it's about.
well, first of all, I lean, and there's a reason why I'm saying I lean towards leftist economics. I lean towards Marxism, communism, socialism. I lean towards that. Um, I can't really point to a government out there and say, oh no, that's a good one that they have. I do tend to see these things more idealistically. I don't really know of anything, but I do think sometimes in American history, certainly we're better than others. I certainly think JFK, who up until recently I also despised, I do actually think he was a decent person who actually had, um, he actually had a good vision for this country. But and the thing is with identity politics, it's not so much. So like the civil rights movement, right? And I
Mhm.
don't know where I read this. I read so many things. I don't know. Like, if I'm writing a Substack, then I'll put the link and I'll remember where it is. But otherwise, it just like gets lost in the soup. But basically, I mean, I think maybe on Reddit somebody said that the civil rights movement, it was about something concrete, and it also kind of involved itself in the class struggle. Whereas I feel like a lot of the 2010s hashtag activism really was more of a gossip trap kind of thing. Eric Hole, another Substack, way better Substack writer, has this term gossip trap that he brought to my attention. I'm sure he hasn't invented it, but I feel like there's this gossip trap atmosphere where it's less about you actually bringing, let's say, I'm Egyptian, I'm ethnically Muslim, so let's say instead of actually bringing Egyptian people or Arab people down, it's more like, oh, you said something that sounded a little off color. I'm going to make sure you never act in Hollywood again. You know, it's very salacious. You
Mhm.
understand? That's more what I resent, that very corporate sort of, which I think most people resent, honestly. And I know, needless to say, a lot of people in that community will say, that's a straw man argument. Who thinks nobody likes that? Oh, that's not true. I mean, that's true. You may not think you think you don't like it, but it turns out, you know how like you think you look a certain way and then you see a picture of yourself.
Absolutely.
I think that's what's happening with these people. I think they think of themselves as being closer to. I think you lean left too, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right. I mean, I guess to that end, I think two things to address on that. Like I'm 33. I guess technically smack dab in the middle of millennials, but I've always I guess I identify as an exennial just because I've most of the culture and art and music and everything that I like is Gen X stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, I guess I would say that I lean left kind of the same way as you. You could say socialist with a small, lowercase s. I was all about early, like the DS, well, not DSA, well DSA later on, which is a different discussion. But
Mhm.
like Occupy Wall Street stuff like that. That was
Mhm.
kind of my political awakening. And I would say I lean left with a caveat, even though I have a good deal of more right-leaning friends right now, just because of the political moment, which I'm sure we'll get into. But also just because, as somebody who's 15 years or so older than me, who sounds like he lived off of this, like the socialist left, to the degree that it exists in United States and the West more broadly speaking, we've been taking a lot of L's lately. So
Yeah.
just when you're in that dissident space, you can you kind of exist in both worlds, really. So
Well, I just, if I can just, I had an evolution too, because I'm telling you how I am now. I don't know. Yeah, maybe I never put this on my Substack actually. Oh no, I did. I think I did. No, I lie. I did. When I was a child, so I was a child in the 80s, right? Um,
mhm.
I'm gonna say, needless to say, I was gonna say, needless to say, I guess I really shouldn't, but more likely than not, you could have guessed I was a Reagan. I loved Reagan as a child. I mean, all the movies, all those blockbuster movies like Iron Eagle, I thought he was great. I thought America was great. I had nothing. Then in the 90s, I kind of was just a straight up Democrat. I just kind of switched places and became a Democrat. And then I think I didn't really lean towards the socialist stuff until about 98 when I was 23. And I did that for maybe 5 years. And then I kind of just like defaulted in the 2000s. I kind of just, yeah, I'll be blunt. Hey, I was a shitlib for a while. I mean, God, even, I really do cringe at some of my social media stuff, even as late as maybe 2000, yeah, 2020, to be honest with you. So yeah, there has been a realignment with me, let alone with the country. And if you want, I can get into that, my own realignment, my political realignment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a good it's a good framing device for the rest of the discussion because two things I want to, and maybe this is a good lead into it as well. Just I'll give you a little bit of context, and for the rest of the listeners, kind of the same thing for me where I was. I don't want to say like I mean shitlib means different things to different people. I remember you because in one of your more recent articles, you talk about the concept of a South Park conservative.
Mhm.
I was kind of like a South Park liberal, I guess. Going way back then.
Mm.
But I grew up in the Bush era, which was kind of, since you were a full adult then, but me kind of coming into my political consciousness. I like to joke that, I was insufferable from a pretty young age. Like I was, in my teens, reading, that like the books like The Big Short after the 2008 financial crash happened,
Right.
or up in the Bush era. So I guess I feel like it was at the time where there was still a good amount of an institutional left that you could say was actually, you could still have a claim to fame for being kind of countercultural with it. But throughout the years, as you wrote about, and I'm sure we'll talk about, there really with the Obama crystallization of the neoliberal shift from like the old school Democrats, Labor Democrats, to the more neoliberal Democrats that, you saw that change a little bit with Clinton and really metastasized with Obama. That's when I got into, my political awakening, was definitely the Occupy Wall Street and some of the early stuff, like Trayvon Martin and the early Black Lives Matter, and then just seeing kind of the slow morphing of the left to becoming more of the establishment. And it's not like, my politics aren't, opposing establishment just for its own stake, but more so like, the things that were important to me, like being anti-war, specific, all these unnecessary wars that I saw that were kind of my radicalization point, and seeing the American standard of living decline and all that, and seeing more and more like the Democrats just seemingly to me say, we're just going to put a pin in that, and then we're going to do all the surface level identity politics stuff that you're alerting to. So that's my long way of answering your question, is saying,
No, I love it.
because it reminds me, specifically, you're talking about the figure of Reagan that you knew as a child who was like a media figure, and to me, it kind of mirrors my experience with Donald Trump. For me growing up, he was maybe not ubiquitous, but you saw Donald Trump everywhere. Like everybody, didn't matter, black, white. I grew up in like a more urban, mostly black area. Even the black people back then loved Donald Trump, and then seeing him as a political figure was a completely different thing. So yeah, I guess so very, very long-winded way of saying, yeah, dig into your personal journey as well as, we have at the time of recording right now, we're at the first week of Donald Trump in office. So it feels like a very strange moment.
Right. Well, just to kind of get back to your evolution, I think there's definitely a lot of parallels. Like, certainly when Occupy was happening, I was ecstatic because I feel like I was probably from 2003 onward, I would say I was probably a closet leftist, a closet socialist. I just kind of took for granted that I would always be, it's kind of hard to have a revolution by yourself. So it's not easy to
True.
fellow travelers at a party. I mean, let's be frank, getting libidinal here at some point, you want to get laid, I mean, I didn't.
Very
but,
true.
At the same time,
I hope it's happened to you at this point. 48.
If a girl says, she's a Democrat, yeah, you're a Democrat. I mean, okay, at some point you're gonna be, yeah, me too. Why would you? So, but then Occupy, needless to say, was very electric for me. Then when there was hold on, and Bernie Sanders. Don't let me forget Bernie Sanders in 2016. I, as many people who I'm confident listening to this will understand and identify with, I was enraged at how Deborah Wasserman Schultz, right? Railroaded Bernie. I mean, whatever. I guess it's her job because she's a stooge, and they're all stooges in the party. So if it wasn't her, it would have been someone else. But I was just furious. I was livid, and then, but all the same, I voted for Hillary. And then because I believed it was the most important election the first time,
Hmm.
when they were floating a Muslim ban. And even though, I'm ethnically Muslim and I don't really follow Islam all that closely, and who knows if I have to enter a database, how that would go. That's a pen name, by the way, Mo Diggs, and I'm not going to
Hmm.
reveal my real name because, yeah. So
That's
anyway,
fair. Prester John is not my real name, believe it or not.
I'm kind of an anon and kind of not, but at the same
Hmm.
time,
Pseudonymous, I think, is the term.
semi-anonymous, I guess
Hmm.
I would say. But so just to even when I go to 12-step meetings, which I mention occasionally in my Substack, my last initial is D. I will never give my actual last initial because I really want to take the anonymity seriously. But going back to the evolution, like I said, even in 2020, I kind of had some woke sympathies. I was doing these kind of YouTube videos, these kind of parody videos. I resented because I was kind of an essential worker. Initially, I was an essential worker fully on site, working in healthcare. Even though it was office work, I was working in healthcare. And then I think I was working every other week on site. So I did grow resentful of, I did grow resentful, I guess, at people who are like, I guess I was resentful of that being told to
Hmm.
work, even though because I did believe COVID was real at the time, and I did believe all the threats. But let me just now I'm getting long-winded. Let me just run to the moment, which was a week after Biden won. I was happy when Biden won. A week later, I distinctly remember thinking, "Where's my?" Because I was getting radicalized during the summer of 2020. But I was thinking after Biden won, a week after Biden won, where's our radical? Where's our left Trump? They talk about a Joe Rogan of the left. I want to know who's the Trump of the left. I want to know who's the president that is really going to do crazy shit that we could all be elated about. And Biden, needless to say, at the time, I thought he was too normal. Obviously, he became, a genocidal maniac. But yeah, I guess we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a really good point to make because I had kind of a similar experience where um, in 2016 I was not into Bernie Sanders. I was a more I guess you could say establishment liberal. Like my family is from the Midwest. We're more like the blue dog Union Democrats. It's like okay, Bernie Sanders. That shit. It sounds good on paper. Um, as you said, it was the most important election ever, part one at that point. I think we just had part three.
Yeah,
And then it's like,
exactly.
yeah, it's just, it's not the time. And then after Trump won, I kind of had the same thing. It's like, oh, okay, well, all bets are off. Let's go crazy. And that's when I saw the way that I think, Mrs. Wasserman Schultz was no longer on the scene at that point because it was pretty transparent at the time how, they screwed over Bernie. Seeing how Bernie Sanders was marginalized and they had all these lies about him that, he was sexist, transphobic, racist. I think if he wasn't Jewish, they would have called him a Nazi, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
after Biden won, I kind of had a similar reaction. Like, I had my time in the desert where I just was reading. I went really hard leading up to similar to you, like leading up to Biden getting elected in the Trump time. I was into like the DSA and all the very socialist stuff. I kind of was always a little bit uncomfortable with the woke stuff just because of the reasons you mentioned that I saw a lot of what I saw as unscrupulous grifters just using it. I think I if you said it or it was in one of your articles, forgive me. It might have blended together since I read them all in the last couple hours again, and then talking to you now. But not about getting a specific civil rights thing, but getting a promotion or getting a Netflix special made. That's when that's what I had a problem with. It's like these people are still on our side. We've got to find a way to work towards it. And then when Biden won, and like you said, doing the genocide and like civil rights acts, voting act getting walked back, all of the things that were supposedly important to me. That's when after Biden, that's when I at least was interested in reading in conceptually the right wing stuff. And I have like the funny story about it is, you've mentioned Curtis Yarvin, and for the people who don't know, he's somebody who's pretty influential on the right now, and his whole thing is, just saying, hey, democracy doesn't work anymore. Let's go back to monarchy. And I was watching a Curtis Yarvin video of like why America should be a monarchy, and my wife walked in and she read the title and she said my face was like, it's like she caught me watching porn or something. I was like, I can explain. But yeah, it's just it's such a weird moment that we're in right now, because
So did you close your laptop?
It was my tower computer, unfortunately, so there's nothing I could do.
No, but when you watch it, see, I don't know if you noticed a TV trope when you watch a TV show and some husband is like, or maybe the wife is like unhappy and they're seeing a guy, or they're basically browsing in a very unhealthy way, trying to see someone else. Maybe they're looking at porn, and the wife, whatever, walks in and they just close the laptop. And that's automatically what they do, just close the laptop, which to me, that's the end right there. I don't know how they survive it. I just always laugh at that. It's like, what, that's it? You're gonna let them skate with that? That would never get away.
Unfortunately, no comic laptop slam in that case. But no, that's now, and we're in a kind of a very weird moment right now. And I feel like politically that's kind of where I'm at, where it's like, Biden pretty ironically enough, I would say he pretty thoroughly like destroyed the legacy of Obama and the neoliberals, as well as kind of, kneecapping the socialists. So that having been said, Donald Trump's first week in office. I know it's a long time coming. What are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, so I don't, and I'm glad you brought that up. And I just want to be clear, it was something about my Substack fellowship.
Subscribers.
Confusing recovery and Substack. My following, I guess, my subscribers, thank you, is that a lot of them like my stuff and read my stuff, but I'm confident a lot of them don't agree with me politically, and maybe they even like some of my titles might scan to them as like right wing. Like I think there's one where where I say, "Can the right capture culture?" And I like that it's well received, but I wonder sometimes, like, wait a minute, do they think I'm like, I feel like sometimes I'm accidentally running a right-wing grift. I try to watch that now. But just to be clear, I'm not a fan of Trump. I mean, I think there's a difference between attacking Trump as president and attacking Trump when he's been banned on Twitter into 2021. He's banned on Twitter. He's not president anymore. When the sitting president is acting like a complete moron and genocidal maniac, and you act like, oh, he's just a sweet old grandpa, and then you keep focusing through your Trump derangement syndrome on him, that's when I'm irritated. Now that he's, doing whatever he's doing, I get it now.
That was always my something that, like, I well-meaning boomer libs. No, I say boomer derisively, not literally boomer, but I get spiritual boomer, you could say, right? Because that was that was always my thing. Is like, Donald Trump is not president right now. He is not in power. Joe Biden is in power. The Democrats are in power. We should criticize them. And that, funnily enough, that was kind of the impetus of when I joined Substack. I wrote an article about, having that very argument with my very kind, but kind of more traditionally boomer lib father-in-law, who, like any criticism I would have of Joe Biden, was shouted down for the very specter of Donald Trump, which ironically, I think, and you've written about this, and I think we'll get to it, has made Donald Trump kind of cool in a way, because he has a certain countercultural affectation and edge now. I think it's there's gonna be pretty rapidly diminishing returns now that he's actually in power.
I've definitely written about that. I definitely think there's gonna be diminishing returns on that. Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line is that that kind of goes to the whole Times Square. That goes to anything reactionary. I'm sorry, I feel feel like I might have talked over you. You were about to say
No,
something. I'm sorry.
that's okay. That's the nature of the beast here. I was waiting for you to get into it.
Just I noticed that. I mean, I don't think it's a big thread on my Substack, but I have mentioned a few times now the nature of reactionary movements. So, arguably, the Beatniks were reactionary against Eisenhower America. Certainly, the Slackers, or definitely the grunge movement, was reactionary against hair metal, right?
Mhm.
So, obviously, if you're not really familiar with hair metal and the context of hair metal, grunge makes a lot less sense. It just sounds very miserable and very angry.
Mhm.
If you're listening for maybe 10 years to songs, or maybe 20 years even, including 70s rock, listening to cock rock on the radio for 20 years, songs about beers and cars and babes. And then finally someone's like, oh my God, I want to put my gun in my mouth and fucking die. And you're like, yes, finally something real. Now it makes sense. But if you're just going to play like Soundgarden just out of the blue, I don't think it has the same impact. And I think that's kind of where, I don't even want to say the Dime Square is certainly a part of this, but in general, the Trump counterculture, which everyone seems to be obsessed with now. Yeah, like you said, there's clearly going to be diminishing returns. And I try to express this to my best friend that I talk to. I It's not that people are not. I get that people voted for immigrants to be deported. I get that. That's true. And I understand that if they're criminals, yeah, okay, good. But when you're trying to use that edgy pro-Trump humor at a time like this where, you know, all said and done, not to bring up a classic shit lib point, but children are being separated from their parents, it doesn't hit as well. It works better with Biden. It works better with Kamala doing her brat dance. Now it just, yeah, I agree. I can't see anything bombing harder, honestly.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point. And I guess this is a good once again a good framing for something else I wanted to bring up. And you talk about Soundgarden being, Nirvana, what have you, being a very specific moment in culture that was a rebellion against something. And I feel like for so long the Democrats and the cultural left have seen themselves, their whole identity was being in opposition to Republicans, conservative Christianity,
Yeah.
white middle America.
Mhm.
But I feel like maybe that's part of the reason they lost, I would say badly relatively. I mean, much like in, 2020, it was a pretty close election.
Mhm.
That having been said, relatively for, the types of demographics and types of wins that you usually see with the Republicans versus the Democrats, it was a pretty big loss for them. And I think that's partially because they still saw themselves as the plucky outsider, even though that they were the establishment and arguably had been since the 90s. So much in the same way, like, Soundgarden out of context, like, wow, why would this be top 40s? This is depressed. I like it. It's good music, but it's just this top 40s. That's kind of, I feel like what we're seeing with the right now. That already, even a weekend, some of that, like, there was a time where, like, oh, fuck you and your lib tears. I think it was genuinely very funny, and I'm not gonna lie, I participated in it, and there was a little bit more energy to it. But now, like, okay, you're in power. What are you gonna do now that you're in power? You can't
Right.
coast on. Yep, they hated Trump, and he was unfair, and I think unfairly. I don't want to say oppressed because he was a president and a billionaire, but unfairly prosecuted. A lot of the criticisms of Donald Trump were, again, that was always my thing. Donald Trump was basically a standard Republican president in his first term, and you weren't criticizing him on what I think were the real issues. And say what you will, but the man ain't a fascist. So I don't know. I guess it feels like my question to you, because you talk about, instead of, which I really like, instead of the vibe shift that everybody talks about, this big gap. And I think it's something we've been kind of dancing around and alluding to, like, okay, the vibe has shifted. Now what? And I guess maybe tell the audience maybe who hasn't read that article yet about your concept of the big gap versus the vibe shift and what you think it might morph into.
I love nothing more. The vibe shift. So this has been it's funny you say that because it's actually been a contentious term. So I might have to get my laptop here and see if I could say her name because it's not really, but there was a bit of a brouhaha in Substack between this writer of The Point and a so-called brouhaha between her and I guess Ross Barkin, even though I think they both realize now, or I think she might have been more emotionally invested in it, but she doesn't understand the term, which is the term vibe shift, which is funny because I'm not a big fan of the term vibe shift myself. It's been overused and overdone. So vibe shift means a lot of things to a lot of people for a long time. In generally, just to give a general ChatGPT-ish answer, I think most people talk about that period when COVID ended, and I think Sean Monahan and Angelicism have been associated mostly with the definition of it. There's an argument, of course, over who said it first, so I'm not going to get into that. But generally between 2021 and maybe 2022, when we were still on the fence of what to do with COVID. Are we going in? Are we going out? Oh, it looks like Gen Z is running things now. So that's what it meant at that time, but because it's such a sticky, catchy term, and because that New York Magazine cut article is so viral, people just kind of like the word enshittification that Cory Doctorow uses. It's one of those neologisms that like everybody just ran with, and now they talk about a vibe shift in politics. They talk about a vibe shift in ketchup. You know what I mean? Everywhere you hear about vibe shifts. So when I wrote my piece, I really wanted to say, look, guys, the vibe shift ended maybe 2023. It ended, okay, people? That's when it ended. And I kind of hew to the traditional, I guess, Sean Monahan definition of, when we really weren't sure what we were doing with COVID, when the political moment, we were kind of tired of the political righteousness, I guess. But then the big gap, I think Gaza has a lot to do with the big gap. The big gap, obviously, then there's many gaps, as I say in the piece. There's a big gap clearly in the left between the Democrats and what I call the alt left, the people who are, or I guess some people used to call them the dirtbag left, I suppose, back in the 2010s, they are clearly pro-Gaza. They are also Luigi Mangione. There is, some, of course, obviously love him and idolize him, but I think a number of people, maybe they won't want to go that far, but they at least connected to the libidinal energy that was released by what transpired. Because yeah, I know it's sad that the guy got killed, but it's also sad that a lot of people can't afford health care. And so there's a big gap between institutions, and there's a big gap between people outside the institutions. Obviously, there's a big income gap. I think I end the piece by talking about the big gap between man and machine, which I guess this past week has had me vindicated, huh? With that
just
one.
a little bit.
Because there's been a lot of poo-pooing, and there's still a lot of poo-pooing over AI, incidentally, by the way. There's a lot of, I think, not to, get to whatever, I don't know, gossipy or whatever, but I think even Freddie DeBoer, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he remains an enormous AI skeptic. And look, I'm not saying AI can do everything and it's incredible. I'm just saying I do believe that there's a system that's going to try to replace all of us with AI.
Yeah. Well, I think since this is going to be released probably a month from recording or so. So
Oh,
I
okay.
believe what you are alluding to is the release of the DeepSeek AI model, which came literally, the day that Donald Trump was elected. I'm sorry,
Mm,
was took office,
mhm,
and he just released the Stargate program where
mhm,
the U.S. government was partnering with Microsoft and OpenAI, putting in $500 billion. And then that same day, this Chinese company, DeepSeek, released a similar AI model that had some parity with ChatGPT, and allegedly did it for about $6 million, and with nowhere near like the hardware level with these NVIDIA chips that are supposedly state of the art. They're required to have that level of of the AI models. Personally, I'm a little skeptical of if that was actually true. I don't, because I know you're right about tech. I don't know how inside baseball you want to get with that, because I work in tech and I have a lot of opinions on it. But to address your main point, I think that definitely popped the AI bubble in like the wild speculation sense. And
right.
interestingly enough, I see like more so on the cultural left, there is just like this very Luddite kind of like knee-jerk reaction of AI, which on one hand I would say, I mean, us millennials, it's become a cliche to the point where it's looped back around to be cringe, like the okay boomer thing that, we mock boomers for the lack of adoption of new technologies. Me seeing so many millennials and people my age who have this very reactionary tendency towards AI. It's like, okay, this is your moment. This is the moment in like 1993 where your parents didn't want to do emails, Um, but that having been said, I do think that you're right, and I think maybe the left has a little bit better instincts on this one. That the issue of, I think AI is a little bit overhyped in a lot of ways, because when you say AI, I feel sometimes like you could replace AI with Angry Wizard in the way that people talk about it, but it
Hmm.
is a kind of revolutionary technology. Maybe not revolutionary in um, the specifics of it, since it's basically just, I mean, like a more powerful Google in some ways, because it lets you parse really large data sets, but it can
Mhm.
potentially replace a lot of knowledge workers. Um, so we are in that moment where we're seeing this AI thing where like the right, the dreaded tech bros are all about it. So again, that's like a another shift that like not that long ago, like all the tech people were very left coded, like your Steve Jobs, your Jared Laniers, people like that were all like these ex hippies.
Right. So just to get back to that moment of the tech bros in Silicon Valley, I guess, being pantsed, I think I vaguely remember writing how are we going to fight big tech? And I mean, I don't know how happy I am that China did it, but hey, it happened and it feels good. I ain't gonna lie, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we kind of, I'll be blunt, we kind of unfairly put I mean, with TikTok and now with this, it just, we consistently have these very unfair, non-competitive rules with them. We try to hoard our chips. We try to say no. Zuckerberg with Meta tries to say no. You can't have TikTok. I'm going to pretend you're evil. You're going to get banned. And both have kind of exploded in big tech's face. I mean, so yeah, weirdly enough, I think there's been I guess Trump winning is not a big win, but other than that, I mean, between, Zuckerberg really looking stupid trying to get TikTok banned, and also this AI moment. Yeah, I do think Silicon. You know what? I will tell you this: there is a difference between us generationally that I want to impart. I want to impart some wisdom from my experience. You
Okay,
being a
shoot.
millennial, and I tell this to my millennial friends. I don't think any of you know what it's like for a major technological moment to end.
Speak on that.
I was there at the end of NASA, man. At the end of the space age as a child, when the Challenger exploded, that mania. I was born in 76. I was
Mhm.
born into space mania. I mean, it wasn't the 60s, but it was there. Everything was set in space. When you talked about in science fiction, it was set in space. Every science fiction, I dare you to find me a science fiction that's not set in space, especially in the 70s.
Mhm.
And, you know, that's where our heads were at. And once that Challenger exploded, it wasn't, of course, it wasn't immediate. Over time, we just lost interest in space. It could happen with tech. It happened with the automobile industry. Detroit was the fucking capital of the world with their cars, man. It can happen with Silicon Valley. It can happen. Silicon Valley, they can. I mean, San Francisco's already turning into a shithole. It can happen. People just assume it's very hard to see. That's kind of what I try to do with my Substack, if I could be if I could be lofty here for a second. I do, if I can get people to see outside of uh the I guess the limits of their time, I guess we're very myopic, I guess. We tend to see things, we tend to assume just because things are the way they are, they're going to remain that way. Silicon Valley's all powerful now, they're going to remain. No, this could be the beginning. My friend, I have a friend who he really loves talking about the AI bubble, and that it's just gonna be a bubble, and that's gonna be bigger than ever. Well, we had the crypto bubble, we had the metaverse bubble,
Mhm. Cloud
and
computing was another big one.
exactly, you
Mhm.
have enough of these bubbles, and after, and just to be clear, this doesn't mean there's gonna be no tech ever again. I'm just saying that it could go the other way. This whole AI thing could go the other way. Silicon Valley could implode and nothing happens. I mean, we were so sure we were going to go to Mars by the 90s when we were kids, you know?
Mhm. Well, I mean, yeah, I think you're saying bubbles can burst, right? I mean,
Mm.
I think you very much hit the nail on the head because I would say I worked in tech and also like growing up in the millennial era. I think you're absolutely right there. We had the same. There was like the cultural cachet that came with being in tech that it would have had, a generation before, like you're talking about, would have had with the space race. And there was something aspirational and cool, and kind of, I guess you could say, libertarian leaning was the tech world in like the 2000s and early 2010s. But and again, it was almost apolitical because it was so aspirational. It was cool, and the tech world was like this, cool, young, sexy thing where, like, you had like the Silicon Valley TV show and all these television shows and movies where, like, hackers and tech people and the geek chic. It was finally cool, but maybe you're right. Maybe DeepSeek, and honestly, like, the adoption of the right adoption of tech was its challenger moment. Since, and again, like, there was so much enthusiasm, and then fear about AI in the tech world, where I work, and now it's just like, it's just going to be a tool like anything else, like crypto or cloud computing. um, but that having been said, I do think it has, because like you said, cars didn't go away. We didn't stop, well, we did stop doing space travel, but the technology that was developed didn't go away. It was used in other applications. And much in the same way, I do, and that's again where my lefty side comes out more. Because if you're going to talk about leftism and socialism and traditional Marxism, this kind of potentially takes out the labor element and that organizing factor and that power base that comes from labor. And I guess to me, that's one of the main contrasts when you see Silicon Valley versus, and again, this is, we're recording this on, it's January 28th. So by the time this is released, we might hear something more specific about it, whether or not, the DeepSeek thing is legit. I have my doubts, that it was created whole cloth. But that having been said, the way that Silicon Valley and your Peter Thiels, your Mark Andreessens, your Elon Musks are looking at it. Again, if we're going to talk about the political angle, Curtis Yarvin and all the monarchist types who see these people as either a monarch or a Julius Caesar or a president like FDR, and you contrast that with how China is approaching it, which is maybe more from their the communist angle, where it's something to augment workers. Like China doesn't seem to be looking to replace its workers with AI or replace its workers with mass immigration. It's an augmentation, and it's kind of a pretty stark contrast in that point.
Oh, you know what? I have to say, I never really knew that. I just kind of took for granted. Well, I mean, I do think there is the truth. All right, so that's the good. I guess that's the good thing with the with how they look to augment the workers. I do like that. But unfortunately, I think both sides, the commonality both sides have, China and America, which is probably why I don't think it'll be as quickly forgotten. The AI is, of course, the military applications.
Mm-hmm.
Although it could just end up being that everything kind of like the space, because that is what happened ultimately with the space age anyway. It's not like we completely, like you said, and I said in my Substack, we never got rid of space age technology. We just stopped using it for space exploration. Maybe we still sent telescopes and things like that. Yeah, sure. Or we still had space flights. Even it just wasn't to anything. We weren't going to Mars and the moon or anything, or it weren't like there wasn't as much enthusiasm, I guess, over it, and we weren't doing it as much. But yeah, I do think, if nothing else, if the chatbots end up being a fad or whatever, I do, or if they just kind of plateau, I at least think we're going to have a military sort of application. But yeah, I never knew that. I never knew that so yeah, I guess you're right. I guess that does vindicate using technology to help the worker instead of hurt the worker.
Mm-hmm. And again, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. I'm not a tanky. I'm not like
Yes.
like a vicious
Neither am I.
China
Yes.
defender. And maybe once again I'll destroy any lefty cred I have and say, I mean, I don't even really think China is communist in any meaningful way anymore. But they do have their, as Xi Jinping famously says, it's communism with Chinese characteristics. Or socialism with Chinese characteristics. So nationalist socialism. Not that I'm calling the Chinese Nazis, but
Right.
they're not exactly trying to self-consciously export communism as a alternative to capitalism in the way that, say, the Soviet Union was.
Well,
So
if I could I just kind of had a thought flash in my head. So
yeah, go ahead.
if I could just, like, before we had our interview, I was on Reddit and they were talking about DeepSeek on Reddit. And so I remember, obviously, during 2023, the narrative on Gaza shifted massively. And I honestly think, like, I would almost even argue with the whole Red Note thing. I think the audience will remember Red Note by this time. The whole Red Note migration, the TikTok refugees to Red Note, between that and this DeepSeek, like, I think paradoxically, I think a lot of Americans are kind of rooting for China, and in general, this kind of love for China. I mean, the only thing I can think of that's vaguely similar is maybe in the 60s and the 70s, when there was that kind of Chairman Mao shtick that a lot of lefties had. But I just to give you a more specific, concrete example, on Reddit, somebody was bringing up the hypocrisy of people saying, "Oh, why don't you go in DeepSeek and mention Tiananmen Square?" And then they'll say, "Hey, why not mention Gaza and ChatGPT, or even better yet, Kent State?" And that was actually illuminating for me, because Gaza, I've done that myself, and I don't think they come out and say I can't talk about that. I think they just try to give a nuanced, both sides answer. But Kent State, they really, I didn't know. I do believe though that ChatGPT does downplay it. But again, just that kind of shift in narrative on China, now on Gaza. Yeah, I think a lot of kids. I do, man, I do think the alt left is having a moment. I was kind of worried that TikTok would be a little too the loss of TikTok or the Trump TV takeover of TikTok would be a little too demoralizing. I don't think it is at all. I mean, I recently read this article, I think it was Rolling Stone or Vanity Fair, on how Chapo Trap House, I think they have their own like weird film unit now in Los Angeles. I mean, Hollywood needs something. Hollywood clearly has difficulty connecting with anybody.
Hmm.
Why not work with the fucking $1,000 socialist podcast studio? Why not? I mean, I don't.
It's either that or you got Mel Gibson, Donald Trump's official envoy to Hollywood. Well, I think
Yeah.
it's interesting that you point that out because it was making me think of if you're comparing and contrasting, say, asking DeepSeek, the Chinese run AI about Tiananmen Square versus obviously OpenAI, Grok, what have you, asking about Gaza. You see, in a way, you see the red lines of each of these countries and these civilizational blocks on display a lot more um, nakedly in a way that you can compare and contrast. Because if you talk about, say, the 60s, when there was there's all that, the champagne socialism of, the new left and the idealization of, say, the Soviet Union or communist China, you really only had what, their propaganda that was able to be made in that system and be sent out, or anything that could be smuggled to the West, or vice versa, right? If you look at, for a phenomenon like Radio Free Europe, for the listeners who don't know, that was in the 60s and 70s when they would be these pirate radio stations that would broadcast rock and roll into the Soviet Union. You really only, there would be so many levels of diffusion. But now with the internet, and specifically with the technology of an LLM, the large language model, for, and forgive me, you probably know, but for listeners, basically what these things can do is they take really, really large sets of data and you ask it a question, and then it can scan all of it and has this great processing power and draw a meaningful conclusion. But, as you alluded to with both DeepSeek or ChatGPT, they put guardrails on it because it's not something that's arbitrarily done at first. Like the first round of training, it will just take anything and spit it back out. But then they actually have people who will train and say, this is a good answer, this is a bad answer. So all that to say, you're seeing alternate models of viewing the world nakedly put up against each other in like a consumable product that you could have on your phone and get like comparing and contrasting answers, which is, if you think about it, kind of an insane thing to exist that you never would have saw. Even the Soviet Union versus the United States, Germany versus England. You could never see it that strongly put on display, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a kind of parabola effect because I definitely think censorship in the 40s on both sides was, or even the 30s and the early 20th century was a lot more obvious on both sides. I mean, even if you lived in an American society, I mean, everything ever since the Civil War, it was so easy to say, to circumscribe what people were saying. But then ever since the 60s, I think there was this kind of explosion in liberal speech and free speech, well, from the literal free speech movement of the 60s. And so I think it took a while to get to that point, but then obviously through the back door of wokeness, there was a lot more censorship. And in the 80s, there was that kind of satanic panic.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, needless to say, China having censorship of their AI, I don't think there's much of a shock there. But as far as our censorship, yeah, I think that was, of course, I mean, certainly the guardrails nowadays. But I think that's what Trump is even. No, I mean, I understand why woke guardrails or whatever, why certain guardrails are very limiting and kind of pointless. But then, have you been on Grok?
I've used it a handful of times.
Yeah.
I kind of mostly use AI for work-related stuff. I think that's probably a good point because I would imagine Grok has different guardrails. And that's something I wrote about in the past. Like for the people, I knew so many people on the left who were like, oh yeah, it's good that ChatGPT is censoring. It's good that Twitter is censoring, Facebook, etc. And that was one of the first things I wrote. It's like, okay, what if what if the cards were switched? What if you saw, that was, Elon Musk bought Twitter. What if there was a, right-wing based AI? Are you okay with that? But I think realistically, like there's always, by the very nature of the technology, there's always going to be a bias baked in that you can't
Yeah.
get rid of. And just by the fact that there has to be human training of the AI. So I guess at a certain point, it's like, picking your reality. What bias do you want and what are you okay with?
Yeah. And I think at a certain point you just have to like check out. There's the mind really reels with the many directions this can go. I mean, you're right. There's always going to be a bias baked in, and I think it's kind of funny how like Elon Musk was trying to get that woke or anti-woke AI, but then it wasn't working because all the reading materials were woke. Most newspapers and magazines don't have a anti-liberal bias,
Don't
so
have a
it's
based setting.
yeah, exactly. There's very few based newspapers. I guess if you just raised him on the Grok on the New York Post, I guess you'd have a slam dunk. But
Hmm. Well, I feel like that, and this is something you touched on too, that I, you talked about the vibe shift and now the big gap,
mhm.
and the future of culture. And this is something I believe we both mutually admire the writer Catherine D. And she's talked about the concept of whether or not culture is stuck. And it seems like mass culture may be dead, but we're seeing not even bifurcation, all these multiple directions that cultures are going in. And just as kind of a launching off point for you, maybe the reason I thought I had to ask your age specifically, because it seems like you have a pretty good pulse on Zoomers. And I remember you writing, which is something that struck me that, between, Gen Z is the biggest generation gap since the 60s, which
Mhm.
makes sense to me as once I started to think about it more. But at first, to me, like much like yourself, you have millennial friends. I have a lot of, a good chunk of Gen Z friends, and I don't see them as that different from millennials. It feels like it's, the same thing, but more of it. But you write about these different cultural tribes that they're breaking off into, because at least for me, like as a millennial, I grew up in the very tail end of when there was a monoculture and a pop culture, but especially them growing up post the end, post in the internet and at the end of monoculture during COVID, during this isolation, you're seeing this really, they're breaking off and I have virtually no interest in the mainstream. So I guess I'm interested, like, how you came to that conclusion, how you see this going, because to put a little bit more of a point on it, you're talking about this moment that the right seem to be having, and I think we're both a little bit skeptical about the degree to which they're going to be able to capitalize on it and become the next big thing. Because I remember you writing about JD Vance talking about white people transitioning as a way to to be able to
Turn to
move up.
college.
Yeah, and I think there is a kernel of truth there. But like I said, the idea that like people are just cynically I think there is something to be said for if you create avenues of success, people will feel them even subconsciously, but I think it's very rare that somebody's cynically like, dang it, I can't make it as a power lifter, let me transition. But there's this very, despite their moment of victory, I see a lot of people, conservatives on the cultural right, who are still so, the pissing off libs or not getting mainstream acceptance from the culture is just something that is so central to their psyche. But I don't think, I think they think that now that Trump has won, not all of them, but some people seem to think that, yep, this is going to be the watershed moment. We're going to go back to the 90s or the 80s and things are going to be based and cool again. But I think that at most they have broken off like, okay, this is an avenue that at least we can work from. It's, if not respectable, we have this avenue. But Zoomers, they seem like they're growing up post that world. So yeah, what are your thoughts on one of my many, many long-winded questions?
All right, so let me see if I can form something here. Well, first off, just to get on the whole conservative hegemony that supposedly has happened. Well, politically it happened, but
Mhm.
culturally, I wrote this somewhere. I don't remember where, but I wrote that it's kind of similar to how Africa was the British didn't run Africa anymore, but there's all these different nations. So I think people can think just because the libs have lost their grip, that means, oh, the right, that they've got it now. No, it means no one's got it now. Be happy that the liberals lost their grip. That part's good for you guys. But this idea, this pipe dream that you're gonna all of a sudden, I mean, you kind of touched on it yourself. You said monoculture is hard enough to begin with, and to think that everybody's gonna want a white 1980s America at the same time. I mean, people, it's all these, a lot of these articles, they'll kind of bring up the same thing. They'll say, well, look at the trad wives, look at look at the trad wives, look at the Christian influencers, look at these
The
raw
trad
egg
cats
people, the
coming
trad
back.
cads. Well, I can do that too. I could say, look at the Luigi Mangione people, look at the Pro Gaza people, look at the trans support. I mean, we could do this all day. There's too much fragmentation for any of this to take place. And there are people who just don't care, or there's people who maybe like a little bit of both. So to kind of get to the fragmentation of Gen Z, I do think there's several tribes, but I also do think amongst those tribes there is a massive gap again in the. So in other words, I think Luigi Mangione kind of exploited that gap further, where some people, even older people who might have agreed politically with Mangione, myself being, I guess, among them, maybe I wasn't such a big fan of the CEO being shot. Whereas a lot of young people are like, no, how the fuck
Fuck that
do
guy.
you, well, how do you, and I mean, it's hard for me to argue. It did get the conversation started. I work, by day, I'm a billing coordinator at a hospital. I'm not going to say which one, of course, but
Mhm.
I, for years, I've dealt with these insurance companies. And you try talking to somebody about the bullshit that these insurance companies pull. I mean, I'm sure it's been sitting
Mhm.
dormant in people's minds. It's something that people have wanted to talk
Mhm.
about, but insurance on the surface seems to be such a boring conversational topic. And when the whole Mangione thing, when the whole Brian Thompson thing happened, it kind of reminded me of Me Too, and that the good moment in Me Too when women came forward and told their stories, as opposed to the Us Weekly version that it devolved into, where it's like, oh, did you hear now who's
Mhm.
had a tryst with somebody and it was problematic? No, I'm talking about the beginning. So that's what all these people talking about, how they lost their. But then again, Gen Z, a lot of Gen Z said, well, yeah, and that's why that's the is it called the power of the deed? Is that the term? I forget the term.
I'd not heard that.
I'm probably fucking it up. Oh, it
I
doesn't
see what you're
matter.
saying though. I mean, I feel like there's very few groups of people that are as universally hated in a bipartisan way as health insurance in the United States.
Yeah.
Because I know other people who work in the medical industry universally hated. For my wife briefly worked in the medical industry, kind of on that same thing. And just like, wow, these people are just absolute scumbags. That it almost feels bipartisan because I do want to push back just a little because I think because Luigi Mangione was on Substack, and I think
Mhm.
his I mean, arguably maybe a little bit right leaning or like center right, but
Mhm.
he was almost a like a Rorschach test. You could because he was, a handsome young man
Right.
who was tech savvy,
Mhm.
who did, a pretty well planned out, competent crime. And, you might as well say, oh, he also on his way there, he like, went and burned down a DMV, he fixed the McDonald's frosty machine. Like this is stuff that like it's populist more than anything really, because you can kind of project basically anything onto Luigi Mangione. People have called him like a communist to a tech bro, what have you. So
Mhm.
he can kind of be a little bit whatever you want him to be.
Yeah. But I guess getting back to the culture, it was some uh, what you mentioned Catherine D's comment on culture. What could you just like
She had an
because I'm pretty sure I know
article.
what you mean, but I want to make
Yeah,
sure I'm on the right track with that.
sure. What I'm referring to is she had an article, I believe it was, where she talked about, there's so much dialogue about how culture was stuck. We're seeing reboot after reboot. Taylor Swift has technically been doing her thing since 2003. Beyonce's been big since the late 90s, and she's like, culture isn't stuck. It's just there's a lot of culture bubbling beneath the surface and all these small subcultures that people get into. This big tent stuff is maybe is stuck, but that's not exactly culture. It's been a while since I read it, but I think that was the kind of the gist of it.
All right, so yeah, I just want to make sure you're referencing the right. I want to make sure I was about to reference the right article here. Okay, so because I'm actually going to end up linking to that in. Well, I guess it is going to be my next piece now. I don't like to say what my next piece is going to be because a lot of times it'll change the last minute. But
Mhm.
one thing that I feel that I would say in the Substack, I guess we'll know. It's coming a month from now anyway, so I guess we'll know then. Is that I think that essay was a debate she was having on wisdom of crowds with Matthew Gazda, where I think she said that culture is alive, it's alive online. Matthew Gazda says no, culture is dead. I think that for me, I think the issue is less whether culture is dead or alive, and more the magnitude of the culture. I do acknowledge that there's culture online, but has there been anything great online? And I'm not going to go into it because now Catherine, bless her, and I love her writing, of course. I know she's trying to put her money where her mouth is and say, "Oh, here's a good website. Here's a good example of what I'm talking about." And there's a good example. So my challenge, I guess, to her and the people who agree with that viewpoint is, show me something from now you too. Show me
Mhm.
you, Prester. Show me something great online only from 20 years ago. The Chocolate Rain from Tay Zonde, Leave Britney Alone. And I mean, obviously, it's hard for me not to sound dismissive because I don't think there's been anything great, but I am opening the floor and sincerely asking, is there something I'm missing that was truly monumentous and great that was
Well,
an internet cultural moment that happened 20 years ago?
well, a couple points of contention. I don't. To be fair, I don't think God, was Chocolate Rain 2004? No, that
I think it
can't
was
be.
2007. Yeah, I don't think it was literally
20.
20 years
We'll
ago, but it's
call it.
close enough.
Yeah, we'll call it 15. Um, I would say for me personally, I, I would. I don't think it depends on what you mean by great, right? Are you talking about an internet video that had the same cultural impact as, say, Star Wars or Purple Rain? No, but the internet is a different beast. The medium is the message, as they say, right? So it's a different thing. But I think what Catherine argues, and again, it's been a hot minute since I read it, and what I would agree with her on is, like you talked about, there's these smaller subcultures. Is there another Star Wars that has been facilitated through the internet? No, there's nothing that's had that same cultural impact and that's been as, ubiquitous as, say, Star Wars. But you've had, I would say thousands of micro Star Wars for different demographics and different subcultures. I mean, I could tell you mentioned something like, Chapo Trap House was a cultural phenomenon in the 2010s, or some of the internet culture that exists. I think it exists, but it's in smaller microcosms. But that having been said, I do think at a certain point, like, culture has to be in real life. So I would agree with you there.
I also think it has to do with, and you're right, the medium is the message, but it's not just that the medium is the message, but the medium and also how that medium is funded, I guess, is the message, which is why Chapo, for example, works. So TV, and again, this is maybe where my Generation X perspective might help. I must have been in my late teens, early 20s, definitely, before TV even approached any level of respectability. And pretty much the first 20 years of my life, everybody knew TV was shit. From birth to age 20, maybe everybody knew TV was shit. You loved it, but it was shit. You loved it. I think even ABC had a weird ad campaign in the 90s. Like, come on, admit it. You love TV. It was a very bizarre, ironic kind of ad campaign.
Very 90s.
And then and then you had The Sopranos, which again, this is one of my earliest Substacks where my earliest, I guess, cross currents where I say, as soon as you had that subscription model, and they took the gamble and said, "Hey, we've been doing this for a while. I think we could do original programming. We don't have to worry about the censors. We don't have to worry about advertising. We can run whatever the fuck we want." And you get something like Sopranos and The Wire. And I think what I look forward to is something like Substack. I never want to be too. I've learned I'm once bitten, twice shy with getting to committed to any one app or one platform, but the potential for Substack or Patreon not having advertising is kind of like the stuff you read on Substack. My Substack, your Substack, all this stuff. If there was advertising, forget it. I mean, we'd be way down in the algorithm. The advertisers don't want anything to do with us. And I think that social media could potentially end up being like broadcast TV, right? I don't know how you're a millennial. I think you skew maybe a little millennial. I don't know. So you've had a childhood maybe with broadcast television, right? Where it figured prominently, I think.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
So there was a time when, although even for you, I'm not sure. I think already by the time you were, I don't know, I think you were already getting used to the idea of cable being a necessity, though. I mean, when I was young, and certainly for my generation, the idea of paying for cable really was such a luxury. I mean, you're getting the TV for free. Why would you pay for it? Now we're the other way around, It's Netflix subscriptions and all that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess I didn't have cable. Well, my family was kind of poor, so we didn't have cable. But it was always like we'd go over to the neighbor's house to watch cable, and it was definitely a luxury.
So then you remember, so then
Mhm.
and now again we live in this kind of weird, like it's the other way around. It's like, or even if it's not cable, you're doing, or of course, I've also had moments where we had legal cable. We've done that too.
Mhm.
But just the general idea is anything but broadcast media or television, and now the same thing might happen with social, where we're just like, that's it, so the same thing could be happening with the internet. The internet, I mean, again,
Mhm.
and I do agree with Catherine here, because I think one thing she does, and I haven't read it in a minute my damn self, but I think one thing she does mention that could help engender culture now is the kind of dark forest, which I know in the 2000s. So the indie rock culture in the 2000s was pretty rich, I have to acknowledge. And a lot of bands kind of broke through on the internet. A lot of comedians too, honestly. But I still want more. I still want more. There needs to be more. There needs to be more for me to
Mhm.
really. But then again, who knows? I mean, again, for decades, people thought TV was always going to make shit. So you never know. We might get
Mhm.
something great out of it.
Yeah. So you're saying we might be entering in the era of prestige shit posting?
But see, that's what I mean.
And
You're
I'm
thinking,
only semi joking though.
yeah. Well, then again, shit posting, of all the things that are lauded, I do actually like shit posting. I mean, there is something.
It's almost an art form in some ways. I mean, we were talking about Chapo Trap House. It's again, the medium is the message. Like, I basically haven't listened to them with any consistency since Bernie Sanders lost. But I remember because they had their book, which I hate to say, not good, folks. But I remember watching a video of a live reading and trying to do their humor read from a book in a live setting. They were just fucking bombing. And it's like, I am somebody who is a fan of them and this sense of humor, but this is not working.
Right.
So maybe there is something to be said. Again, I was semi joking, but prestige shit posting. I've heard people talk about, there have been, I what's his face, Delicious Tacos, or what's her name, Gabby Hanna, who started as more online posters, and it was published into an actual book. And I feel like that's kind of, in a way, going about it the wrong way. It seems like, like you said, we thought about the internet like we thought about, it's like TV but on your computer, it's like TV but on your phone.
Mhm.
But once you're not constrained by that medium, because I could give you various examples of media that was made for the medium of the internet that I think is genuinely brilliant. It's much more of a narrow cast. It would be for my interest. It could be something as simple as like a history podcast, say like, somebody, somewhat more of an OG, like Dan Carlin, who does these, 7-hour history podcasts that would not work in any other format, or, YouTube video series that I've seen that are very small budget, but very creative, that you couldn't do a TV or movie adaptation because it wouldn't work. It's not the right medium for it.
Yeah, even these things you mentioned, though, I mean, all of these things, they're non-fictional, which is a parallel to television. I mean, okay, so you
Mhm.
look at an example I bring up often, 60s TV, right? Yeah, you have Star Trek and you have The Twilight Zone, but other than that, 60s TV, I mean, come on,
Mhm.
it's pretty silly, like I
Yeah.
Dream of Genie, like what?
Mhm.
What's happening? But then you look at the news footage. I mean, you got fucking news footage of the My Lai massacre. I mean, the nonfiction TV, the Beatles, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, was astounding. So I think that's a very similar, again, I mean, there's lots of parallels. I mean, I think that seems to be the parallel now with the internet too, where
Mhm.
as far as creating something, we might be in a sort of, we may still be stuck in the mud there, frankly. I think. And then again,
Mhm.
I'm 48, so I have to acknowledge my myopic
Yeah.
perspective. But then again, I don't think anyone's proven me wrong. I mean, even with the examples you gave, these seem like primarily non-fiction
Well,
examples, which are valid, but
I
I don't
one of
think.
them was a fiction. I mean, it's one of those things. I'd have to think of the name of the YouTube channel, but for example, it's like this video that it's like Mickey Mouse and Goofy, and like they're in Vietnam, and it starts out like very silly, but as the videos go on, because it's very like I'll have to find it and maybe add it into the show notes because I think it's really genuinely really cool and very interesting because they start out like
Okay.
Mickey and Goofy are in Vietnam together, and Mickey has to kill Goofy because he found some documents that it's gonna reveal something about the Vietnam War, and it's this series of videos that goes on. And like Mickey Mouse's descent into madness, and it slowly morphs over. It's doing this parody voice of Mickey Mouse with very amateurish animation to as the series goes on, and like Mickey Mouse descends into madness, the animation quality gets better and the music gets better, and it actually tells an interesting story, and it's this weird surreal thing that's basically started as a shit post but genuinely very interesting. I think it's there. And maybe you being, in your 40s and me being in my mid 30s, I think it's kind of like, if you and I were our age that we are now, and we're in like, 1989, it's like, music is dead. It's all this hair metal shit. It's, silly over the top hip hop. And, NWA and Nirvana are working just beneath the surface. So to challenge you
Hold
there, I
on.
think it could very well exist, and I
Well,
think it's a medium that's not been utilized.
well, I mean, I definitely acknowledge, and I think I did literally acknowledge that could definitely happen in the
Mm-hmm.
future. I just feel so. I guess another way to frame it, and maybe this will put a finer point on it. For me, I think, unfortunately, a large part of our still early internet history has been sopped up with social media. So this thing that you're describing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, sounds cool. It sounds great. Doesn't really sound like a social media thing, though, right?
Oh no, I wasn't trying to say social media. I
No,
just
no,
mean
no,
like
no, no. I
okay,
know
okay,
you weren't. I
okay,
wasn't trying to
okay.
do a gotcha. I'm just saying that I think unfortunately, social media has had, well, not only has it had such a stranglehold on everything, but so many people in the culture industry. Uh, it's kind of like when people used to say, you have to work at the studios. They insisted you have to go through the studios, you have to go through social media, you have to be on Instagram. But you can go outside it. I go outside it. I think I maybe promoted my Substacks for a month on Instagram. And then I stopped. I'm like, fuck it. I'm just gonna say on Substack. I'm not gonna make a billion different subscriptions. I'm gonna do it my way. I'm just gonna write. I don't give a shit. You don't have to do it that. But going back to the social media point, the word social, right? It's what it sounds like. You're being social.
Mhm.
So when you're being social, how can you really do something great if you're being social, right? Like David Lynch doing something great. I don't think he's being social. I think he's
Mhm.
telling you his nightmarish, he told
Okay.
you his nightmarish vision. Everything that I've known to be great, if you brought it in a social setting, would get you alienated. But reflecting social media, what's popular on their influencers, right? Pretty guys and girls saying, "Get ready with me." Very conversational, like, "Hey, I'm doing this. Hey, I'm doing that." So I'm not acknowledging, and I think there I would agree with Catherine D and you. In the margins, there's cool stuff, but it does get crowded by this borderline monoculture of fresh-faced
Mhm.
influencers and social media personalities that just have no interest in really offering a vision. That's
Okay.
sad because I'm
No.
sorry.
So I do. I guess. I think maybe we had a distinction without a difference there because I think I agree with you 100% on that. Social media, in and of itself, I don't think it can ever really be an art form. It can be a way to convey art and get it out there. Although the one counterexample I will give that it did made me think of, have you heard of the genre of creepypastas?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that they originally it's like mostly on like 4chan or Reddit for people who don't know. They'll do like these creepy stories, usually in first person. They range from like, pretty shitty to I read a couple that were like genuinely really, really good writing. So I think it's something that can exist, but I think it's definitely a lot harder. I would agree with you. If you're directly in that feedback loop, you don't have the distance you need to make truly great art. As a distribution method, for sure, the internet is a game changer. Because, like you alluded to, I think in one of your articles recently, like the 2010s, and maybe I don't know if it's the 2010s, like the last decade has been the worst for Hollywood ever. Because I remember reading an article where Steven Spielberg said, the Hollywood as we know it now is not going to survive the 2020s, much in the way that like Hollywood died and was reborn, new Hollywood in the 70s. I think we could see that with film, with music, with TV is not the right word, but shorter form film that would be in the TV format. Just with the internet as a distribution method, because now like your iPhone can make a better video than pretty much anything. There's very high end cameras. You can edit it with free software. You can distribute it. You can write it. I think there's a lot there, but I would agree with you there. If you have that direct feedback loop, it kind of destroys it. You just get the slop.
Well, I want to go back to your creepypasta thing. Even that happens on message boards, which I know it's similar, but really, if you think about it, something like Reddit or message board, it sounds like a minor difference, but you just kind of have your weird username. Nobody on Reddit has a profile picture, So I think that makes an enormous difference. I think social media, again, very front facing, very there's a clear hierarchy. But yeah, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse here. I just feel that.
I think you hit on something interesting, because in the creepypasta genre, and we don't have to do a super deep dive on this, but there's like three main websites that it comes from. It's like the SCP Foundation, which is its own standalone website, Reddit, and 4chan, and you get three very distinct flavors. I think that you have a profile with Reddit, like SCP is its own thing. It's kind of its own cinematic universe as much. Reddit, you have it tends to be more short stories, and people tend to be more grandiose. And because you're attaching it to a profile, you're attaching it to trying to get karma, upvotes, whatever. Whereas the 4chan ones are completely anonymous, and it's almost always done in like a first person. Like, I did this, I did that, I experienced that. And at least for my taste ones, 9 times out of 10, the 4chan ones are the best. And maybe it's the anonymity that you're not trying to do it for social media clout. You're just creating to create, if that makes sense.
That honestly kind of proves the point. If anything, it's kind of a shame that 4chan has, this. I'm not a 4chan guy. I don't think I will be, but if only there were a 4chan that didn't have the stigma and that still similarly left you very open to being. But unfortunately, now when we think Anon, we think it tends to go to a very dark place. But yeah,
Viper 1488, etc.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, then I guess that takes us to the point of because a lot of great works of art, I mean, I think you can identify with this. A lot of the things I've read or watched or listened to, and this runs the gamut of everything, by the way, they certainly didn't have political views I espoused. They definitely offended me. They hurt me. I mean, a band like Guns N' Roses, I grew up, pretty much.
Yep, 1 in a million. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I said, I was, I grew up ethnically Muslim, so to hear,
you don't have to repeat it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We know.
I was gonna. All right.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
but yeah, I was just gonna say, that hearing it, on the one hand, it hurt me, and I think I even made cope about what the song is. But then I learned to like it despite itself. It's still a
Hmm.
beautiful song. And
Hmm.
you get things like that with art. You get things that don't agree, that do confront you, and you don't fully identify with everything they're doing or saying, but there's still something about it you like. And I kind of miss that messiness. I feel like, and I think, again, I guess we're kind of going back to social media here, but that's kind of what happens with social media. I think because, again, because it's social, again, and so, well, even us now having a conversation, we kind of want to understand each other's viewpoints. I can't sit there and just be vague about everything and
Sure.
cryptic and elusive like a Bob Dylan song, which, oh boy. Is it okay if I take a Bob Dylan tangent, or is there something else
Yeah,
you
go
have
for
in
it.
the okay?
No.
I have a tendency of being very proud of my predictions. So I predicted that Joe Biden would be a very unpopular president. I predicted that Gen Z would hate him. I predicted he'd be the next LBJ. He actually stepped down, so he did not seek re-election.
Hmm.
So that's a pretty good fucking, like I predicted that in November. I didn't literally think he wouldn't seek re-election, but I compared him to LBJ, and a few months later he decided not to seek re-election. So that's pretty.
Hmm.
So
Good track
anyway,
record.
going to Bob Dylan. I don't think A Complete Unknown is going to be a good movie. I'm a Bob Dylan fanatic, so you can't go by me. I'm too much of a geek to ever enjoy a movie like that. But I do know the kids like Timothy Chalamet, and I did think that that might bring some attention to the project and bring some attention to Dylan. I was kind of right the first time, and then apparently done his he performed a couple of songs on Saturday Night Live as Bob Dylan,
Hmm.
and well, I'm sorry, not as Bob. He performed a couple of Bob Dylan songs on
In
Saturday Night Live,
character.
but he just sang a couple of Bob Dylan
Hmm.
songs. I think he might have dressed like him a little bit, but he did perform a couple of Bob Dylan songs. I think one of them was like a medley of the two songs, and there was a third one. But I think there was Outlaw Blues, and I forget what the other song was. And then the second appearance, I think he did Tomorrow Is a Long Time. But again, it could potentially raise interest in Bob Dylan's music, and I hope here's where the gamble might not have paid off yet, but I hope the question kids ask themselves is, where's our Bob Dylan? Because these are culturally they might be one thing, but
Hmm.
otherwise, on a socio-political context, these are exciting times. I mean, dangerous and scary for sure, but there's a lot of shit going on, man. There's
Very
a
true.
lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of surprises and upsets and very interesting political realignments. And to think that the culture is just going to stay bland and not, I mean, look, I told you what I think about how far we can get with, and my God, I hope I'm wrong about internet culture, by the way. But even on a legacy media, movies and TV, I mean, that also, and I actually am angry about that because, somebody having an Instagram account and not wowing the world, okay, but these Hollywood movies, the books, not reflecting what's going on in any way. I mean, what do you think of that? I'll ask you. What do you think? Like, does that not bother you that we're going through all this insanity and the movies and the TV are just kind of stuck in this weird rut? Do you not?
No, I
Do you
mean,
see what I'm saying? You see what I'm
yeah,
saying,
no, it
right?
bothers me. I mean, you say you're a big Bob Dylan fanatic. You're 47, so you grew up in like the 90s, 60s throwback, which was my childhood, and then I had a Bob Dylan phase in the 2000s, and now we might see even more. The Zoomers doing it. So that's like the fourth generation of the same fucking shit. And if I'm understanding you, like, where's our Bob Dylan who's speaking to the moment that Bob Dylan spoke to? But for us, um, I'm going to say something that I think you're not going to like, and bear in mind this is not a value judgment and not something that I think is good. But I think the Bob Dylan of our age is probably an influencer because if you think about it, Bob Dylan existed in a time where media was basically just movies, the TV you mentioned. It's like, I Love Lucy, very popcorn entertainment, or the only thing that actually could have some subversive messages to it that could actually speak to something was things like Bob Dylan or the Beatles. And it was very populous, and they could just get it out there. So I don't know, maybe the Bob Dylan of our generation is an influencer, and they could still do music, but I think if you're trying to do it in the traditional way of being a recording artist who goes into the studio and writes songs, records them, it gets marketed by the record company. I mean, that's kind of as antiquated and counterproductive to the message as Bob Dylan writing for I Love Lucy would have been in like 1964. Does that make sense?
A little bit, yeah. I see what you mean. Well, there's definitely more control now. But I think that's maybe the yeah. No, I see what you mean. Well,
Mhm.
certainly people seem to want to be influencers, and I think that's the other
Mhm.
thing too, is who wants to do what. I mean, I feel beyond people wanting to, so let's say somebody doesn't want to be an influencer, right? And they want to be a musician.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't want to be an influencer, maybe they want to be a musician. Okay.
Mhm.
But again, with that social media metric in your head and that optimization narrative in your head, you want the most views, you want the most likes. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I guess, and I had a moment where I really was hopeful that there would be a '60s type explosion of culture,
Mhm.
not like the '60s, of course, its own flavor, of course, but I think it's slowly starting to dawn on me. I don't think anybody has that desire for greatness because, well, look, that kind of goes back to you mentioning where can it go? It can only go to those avenues: being an influencer, being a podcaster, being whatever, like just like all these like limited avenues. And yeah, people want to write books, but does anybody want to read? People want to make movies. Do people watch movies anymore? So that's a good point. And even with the music, you might get like a salacious, TikTokable song. Does anybody listen to albums? Bob Dylan made albums. So
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think again, different generations are going to want different things, but we are in kind of unprecedented cultural times in some ways. So maybe it'll still
yes,
happen
yes, no, I know what
in
you
its own
mean.
form.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean with different generations want different things, but I do think it would be a real. And all right, so there is also the 2000s way where, because in the 2000s, I mentioned this too, where the not a lot of people were directly doing music about the Iraq War. And I was okay with that. I didn't want that.
Mhm.
I actually was okay with that.
Green Day basically was the only one I can think of.
Yeah, and that was
System of a
kind
Down.
of right. Yeah, no, I wasn't really but then there was still a sort of a aesthetic flowering that was happening at the time. I mean, look, the hipster counterculture is definitely weaker during Iraq than the hippie culture was during
Mhm.
the Vietnam War, but there was still an understanding that okay, but we don't want the mainstream. We don't like
Yeah.
the mainstream. So at least there was that basic schematic.
Well,
Whereas, yeah.
well, I think you touched on something, and you wrote about it as well. Like the hippies initially were a very specific cultural and political product, and obviously, as you know and wrote about, the farther along it went, the farther away it got from that, and it became either more aesthetic or about, like Christopher Lasch writes about in the culture of narcissism, your more your specific your self actualization was the buzz term, um, and I guess that's kind of what I thought of the hipster culture that existed. I mean, it was something that was aspirational for me when I was like in high school, but it kind of basically ended by the time I was old enough to participate in it. Partially because I think like the hipster thing, it was more to me, it seemed basically just aesthetic. It wasn't like, yeah, we're go get some artisanal vegan burger in Bushwick, and then after that we're gonna go protest. It was like a generally understood cultural thing that you're against, everything that the hippies were against, basically. So I get that's kind of again as I tend to do, my long-winded way of saying, like, it feels like that was mostly just completely aesthetic, and it wasn't about rebellion. And like, would your modern day Bob Dylan be about the big cultural moment that Bob Dylan had musically, or do you mean your next Bob Dylan is somebody who has this moment where they can speak to a time and culture? Because I feel like a time, there was a time, in the 60s, 70s, where that could be the same person, but it feels like now it has to be separated. Also because, like, you almost couldn't have a Bob, like, somebody who shows up with an acoustic guitar and starts singing about Gaza, because, the boomers would love that. Like, oh, finally we have our next Bob Dylan. And by that very nature, you couldn't be Bob Dylan because the older generations at the time hated Bob Dylan,
Yeah, no, I think I just generally mean somebody who represents the frustration. So like a song like
Mhm.
Rolling Stones, I Can't Get No Satisfaction.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not a literal protest song, but there's rage, there's frustration, there's the one throwaway line about the guy doing the television advertisement. He can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. So I do think there's that potential. I don't think, yeah, that's a good observation, the keen question, because yeah, I don't think
Mhm.
I don't, yeah,
Mhm.
that's, yeah, okay, yeah, I don't want, oh, that's a really good point. I don't want somebody, okay, I don't want, I hope I made this clear in my
Mhm.
Substack. I don't want anybody to literally write a song about Luigi Mangione. I don't want somebody to literally write it. I'm just talking about
Yeah.
capturing nothing is even capturing the spirit of the times. There's not even an echo. I mean, how many times have you seen a Twilight Zone episode and they may not directly allude to what's going on in the news, but you can kind of
Yeah.
intuit that it's spiritually in sync with the times. Where I'm not even
Mhm.
getting that. I'm getting,
No, I know what you mean.
yeah. That's
Because I
that's
would
more my
say,
thing. That's more my
once
issue.
again, there's a bifurcation where, like, because I feel like that's why a lot of I guess I want to put it, the woke stuff fails, because it's either, because in our media right now, it's very, like, doesn't even acknowledge the moment of the time, like you said. Like, some of the top 40s pop music I hear now, when I hear it, it could be from any time. There's nothing specific
That's
about
what I'm
it.
talking about. Yes.
But or it's like, when you talk about TV or like Twilight Zone, the thing that makes me think of is, you mentioned Star Trek. Like, there's an older episode of Star Trek where, one of the characters, I'm not a huge Star Trek guy. It was Jonathan Frakes' character.
Mm.
He falls in love with this woman, and they're a species where they don't have gender. They're, I guess you could say, by our modern terms, they're all non-binary. But this one person's like, no, I'm not like this way. I'm a woman and I want to be with a man. And you can tell what it's about without it spelling it out to you. It's about, like, homosexuality and making you think, what if you lived in a society where the very way that you were born and feels natural to you is considered abhorrent? And how would you react in that world?
Yeah.
Whereas some of the modern Star Trek I've seen, the little bit I have, there's literally, like, elderly, not Captain Kirk, Captain Picard, and all these other, like, older actors who have come back. They literally went back in time to fight ICE. It's either so vague that it could be anything, or it's so on the nose that it could be alienating to half your audience. And at least to me, like, that's just bad art and bad writing. Like, don't directly show me, like, Captain Picard fighting Donald Trump. Like, have a little fucking artistry with it.
No, that's exactly. and this is something I guess I say is the most important thing, but it's hard to really talk about because I guess there haven't been as many precedents for it. But I do think like we need a revolution of consciousness, and especially with all the AI shit going on. And so again, culture is a great example of the revolution of consciousness because it doesn't have to literally be. I mean, a lot of horror movies, you'll find a lot of like Night of the
Mhm.
Living Dead. It wasn't literally about Vietnam. I don't think George Romero,
Mhm.
or maybe George Romero wanted it to be about Vietnam. I never know, but I'm just saying I don't think he made it literal. I think it was
Mhm.
just again, it was just sort of this. It kind of fit. Oh God,
Yeah,
it
I
fit
get
the
what you're
vibe.
saying.
It fit the
Yeah,
vibe. I know that word has been overdone, but it
it's
applies.
descriptive. It's useful. I think maybe one of the closest things we have is like Get Out, which I think was good, but the subsequent movies became a little bit by Jordan Peele became a little too on the nose for me at time. But you could tell. I don't want to spoil the whole movie. You could tell what they were saying and the point he was trying to make, and then he made the same point like three other times in a very on the nose way. So maybe there does need to be a little bit
Oh,
more.
hold on, hold on. You didn't like Us?
Um, Not as much, but I mean, I don't want to get into the specifics, but I mean, my point being that like you're making the same point multiple times. It feels like.
So that I get, yeah. The only
Uh-huh.
thing I liked about Us, and I feel the reason why Us was less popular is because it was a black on black issue. I feel like Get Out was black on white, so it felt
Yeah,
more. Whereas I think because Us was more of a black on black issue, it got more politically muddied. So I actually think it was the better film personally.
I guess
And
that makes sense. I'd have to re-examine, and
I,
I guess that's
yeah, I'm gonna
it
say
was
it. Hey,
a
you know
white
what?
person, liberal white person struggle session was kind of what Get Out felt like at times, just the way that it was talked about in the media at least. But that's maybe a digression for another time because I know we're getting close to our time. I don't want to keep you too late.
Oh, I
So
understand.
yeah. So on that note, I guess first question for you, my second to last question. You mentioned you have some stuff coming up. Do you have some plugs? Do you have anything else coming up that you want to promote?
Yeah, so I wrote well, I guess by the time of this publication, well no, actually the print publication will still be coming out. So I wrote a review for a upcoming magazine called the Metropolitan Review. Ross Barkin, Sam Kahn, and Lou Behet, I believe her name is. Let me make sure about that. But yeah, I wrote a review, and this Friday, which I guess is by the time I'm doing a live reading of it, my first live reading ever of my review of Megalopolis and Joker 2. Um, and in general, I think people should check out the Metropolitan Review because I think that's kind of where Substack is going to end up going. I think instead of having, like, do you remember like blogs when like
Yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
idea was like, oh, we're just going to write blogs and that's it. And then it ended up being group blogs.
Hmm.
So I think we're going to see a similar transition. So definitely start reading that. Obviously, start reading Cross Current. And yeah, I think that's enough plugs for now for me.
Well, awesome. So I guess I always have a final sign-off question for guests. We covered a lot of ground here, not too doom and gloom. There's a lot of crazy shit going on in the world. What's something that makes you hopeful for the future, or something that you would make you think that things are gonna be okay?
Something that makes me hopeful for the future. Well, I did take down a note today for my upcoming Substack. So apparently, sex is back in movies, which on its own, it sounds like who cares? But in the 60s, that's what happened too. A lot of foreign films were very popular. You know, a lot of guys would go watch a foreign film under the pretense that they want to watch art, really just want to see a pair of tits. But that's how you had, well, first of all, that's how you had the Roger Corman Film School, which led to the New Wave. That's how, of course, you had the New Wave of Hollywood. So, fires begin with tinder sticks. You don't just light a log on a fire. You need these little, so maybe between what you're saying with Catherine D and things like that, maybe we will get something. That makes me hopeful, but
Well, that's a great note to end on. Mr. Diggs, I appreciate you coming on. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to talk again sometime.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime.